who has had a good week?
I'm giving good week to 110 people in Germany who were reportedly freed from prison last week thanks to a Berlin-based project called the Freiheitsfonds or Freedom Fund. They were all people who had been put in prison for not paying for their tickets on public transport.
I'm sorry, people get sent to prison in Germany for not paying for their train or bus tickets.
Yes, under Section 265A of the German Criminal Code, anyone who deliberately avoids paying for their ticket on public transport can be punished with a fine or a substitute prison sentence of up to 1 year if they can't pay that fine.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
God. I mean, here in Paris, jumping over the metro barriers so you'd have to pay for a ticket, it's kind of a national sport. I'm not condoning it as a behavior, but I'm just saying that the attitudes towards it are pretty relaxed.
Same. It's very rare that I go through the metro barriers in Amsterdam and there's not someone trying to squeeze very close to me behind me so that they can get through on my ticket.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also not condoning it at all, but I really don't think people should be sent to prison for up to a year for that crime. And neither do the organisers behind the Freedom Fund. And they decided to make June the 12th, which was last week, Freedom Day. And they raised money from kind members of the public to pay the fines for these 110 people so that they could be released from prison. They described their action as the quote-unquote largest prisoner liberation in German history. I haven't been able to fact check that, I'm afraid, but I'm taking their word for it.
I've just been looking up while you were talking what the penalties are here in France for fare dodging. And on the Paris metro, it's like 70 euros as a fine. On the train, if you are a repeat offender, apparently you can actually risk 6 months in prison in France. Who knew? I can actually see a news story from 2023 about a guy who got jailed for 3 months after getting caught 48 times trying to take the train for free and not paying his fines. But from what I can see, that seems to be quite an exceptional case in France. I don't think there are hundreds of people locked up over that here.
No, I don't think they are. From my research also, it seems like in France that happens very rarely.
Huh. I mean, just generally, it seems like quite archaic to put people in prison for fare dodging.
Yeah, well, I mean, this piece of the criminal code is actually quite archaic. It dates back to the Nazi era, back to 1935. And it's also an incredibly unpopular piece of law. A survey from Infratest that was carried out in 2023 suggested that more than 2/3 of Germans think that ticket dodging should be decriminalized. And there was, in fact, a draft bill proposed by the previous coalition government under Olaf Scholz that was planning on doing exactly that, but it didn't get all the way into legislation. So the issue still requires political action from this new German coalition. The people behind the Freedom Fund hope that this action, Freedom Day, will once again draw attention to what they describe as an inhumane system of substitute imprisonment. The Freedom Fund's actually been around for a while. They've been running since 2021, and the organisers claim to have freed 1,396 prisoners during that time.
Whoa.
Reducing a total of 254 years of prison time.
That is a lot of prison space that has been freed up by these people.
It really is. And of course, that's also a lot of money. And of course, a lot of money was paid via donations to cover these fines, around 1.2 million euros in total. But, and this is quite extraordinary, the organisation claimed that all those shortened prison sentences that resulted from their initiative has saved the state 19.8 million euros.
Wow, because it costs so much money to keep people in prison.
Yeah, it costs the state around 200 euros per day that someone is incarcerated.
Huh. When you think about all of the guard costs as well as the food and electricity of the prison. I mean, that is such a huge amount of money for the state to be paying to imprison people for something that is essentially a petty crime, right? Locking up rapists and murderers so that other citizens are protected from these dangerous people. Sure, that makes a lot of sense to me. But do we really need to pay all of this money to protect society from people who didn't pay for their train tickets?
Yeah, I was quite shocked to hear that things can escalate to a prison sentence for these people who can't afford to pay the fine. And here I should be honest to mention that I actually have personal experience with being caught without a ticket on public transport in Germany.
Dominic, naughty.
Yeah, I was working in Munich a few years ago and traveling on the S-Bahn, and I had picked up what I thought was my weekly travel card, but I was living there for a few months, and I picked up the one from the week before.
Oh, did you?
A group of 5 rather intimidating men in plain clothes asked to see my ticket, and I showed them my invalid ticket, and I got marched out of the train and taken to an ATM to pay them quite a large fine in cash.
Oh my God.
It was, of course, my mistake. I did have a ticket. I had bought a ticket, but I didn't have it on me, so I understand I had to pay a fine. But it was really intimidating being circled by these incredibly muscular men and treated like a criminal. So, yeah, obviously, I've not been imprisoned, but I have experienced how the German authorities can be pretty heavy-handed if you don't have a ticket on public transport. And yeah, of course, I understand that to some extent something has to be done to incentivize people to pay for their tickets. But to think that if I had been in a situation where I couldn't afford to pay that fine, that I would have gone to jail, that seems wild to me.
And I guess the people who indeed can't afford to pay that fine or can't afford to pay for public transport in the first place, presumably a lot of the time that will be the poorest, most vulnerable people in society.
Well, exactly. According to Freiheitsfonds, 89% of the people who end up in jail are unemployed. 15% of them don't have a fixed address, and 15% of them are suicidal. And yeah, I very much doubt that a jail term is going to help them with future work prospects or with their mental health. I should mention that even though the legislation to decriminalize this practice hasn't passed in Germany at a federal level, quite a few cities and municipalities have changed the rules already and have decided not to jail people who are caught without a ticket and can't pay the fine. There are various different liberalizing policies in different places like Bonn and Leipzig. And there is a particularly imaginative policy in Bremen where people who have repeatedly been caught without a ticket and are affected by poverty, they only have to pay 10 euros a month for their transport ticket, and the rest is subsidized by the state. This is, of course, something that costs the state some extra money, but it's much less money than if these people were put in jail for repeatedly not paying for their tickets.
Across Germany, how many people end up in jail every year with one of these substitute imprisonments because they couldn't pay their fine?
Yeah, I found it quite hard to find a precise number, but according to a report I read in the Frankfurter Rundschau, it's about 9,000 people each year.
Wow, it's crazy.
Yeah, and actually, if we stay in Frankfurt for a moment, on Freedom Day in Frankfurt, according to Freiheitsfonds, they paid 1,230 euros to get one man, referred to as Herr M, released. And because they did that, he was able to attend the birth of his child 2 days later. So, yeah, this grassroots project is really making a difference to people's lives.
That's really nice that they were able to do that. What is the likelihood that there will be a national change to this policy in Germany anytime soon?
Well, according to the Office of the Minister of Justice, Stephanie Hubig, who is from the Social Democrats, they told the Frankfurter Rundschau that they want to modernize the criminal law, and they are examining which provisions can be eliminated from this section of the criminal code that I mentioned earlier. And it looks like the Greens, the Left, and the SPD in the Bundestag are all very keen to repeal the offending paragraph in the criminal code. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see when and if the political consensus coagulates into a majority and whether this can all lead to legislative change on the federal level.
I'm curious, how does Germany's fare dodging policy compare with other European countries? Like, my assumption is that this is outlandishly strict, but is that actually the case?
Yeah, I think your hunch is correct. Broadly, it seems very unlikely that you would be imprisoned for fare dodging in most of the rest of the EU. It can happen in theory in quite a few countries, but it seems like it happens very rarely. Of course, Europe is not only the EU, and in Switzerland, it's actually not so different to Germany. Thousands of
Oh,
people end up in jail there each year due to fare dodging, often because they couldn't
huh.
pay their fines.
Also, because the Swiss trains are much nicer, so it's
Maybe.
like you should be punished for not paying for this amazing service, which is
Interestingly,
not true for Deutsche Bahn in Germany.
that's true. Maybe, no. I don't think we can say that it's more justified because it's a better service. But quite interestingly, fare dodging has been booming in Switzerland in recent years. They have this infamous public list where they publish each year the names of anyone who didn't pay for their transport and got caught.
Oh, to
It's
like
like
shame you.
a name and shame, yeah. And last
Oh.
year, that list contained 1 million names. Which is the highest number of names since the records were begun in 2019.
Oh,
And yeah, this
interesting. Also, kind
does,
of defies the point of it, I think.
yeah, true. Because, well, you could go through and like search for your enemies and be like, ha, found you.
If like, does it really shame you if you're on a list of 1 million people that all committed the same supposed crime? I would question that.
Yeah.
If it was like 10 people, maybe.
Yeah, and sadly, I think it might be a badge of honor for some people.
Yeah.
It does, however, seem to tie in with a broader trend in Europe that more and more people are avoiding paying for their transport. And that is often because people can't afford it. We're
Hmm.
still in a cost of living crisis in most of Europe. But yeah, it's also important to note that there is research suggesting that not all fare dodging happens out of financial hardship. Some people just think they don't have to contribute. Some people just want to get away with it. And I read quite an interesting report on a study from Queensland in Australia, not European, forgive me. Anyway, I'll share a link to it in the notes because it's really interesting. And it basically concluded that ticket inspections are not the only answer to stopping fare dodging, and that winning public trust, investing in better service quality, reliability, and community engagement can be just as effective at avoiding fare dodging as increasing inspections. Anyway, check that out if you really want to get into the weeds. But for now, I'm handing my good week to 110 Germans who were helped out by the generous people who donated to the Freiheitsfonds last week.